Welcome to Rise from Switzerland, where the authorities in Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland, and the all-important Liechtenstein are in discussions about a travel bubble that will allow for international summer travel. I am Professor Damien Hodari of the École Hôtelière de Lausanne.
And as I say every week, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us for Rise. We are genuinely grateful to have you with us. And it's our 5th episode. We're 5 episodes in. This is fantastic. We've been doing this every week. What is Rise? It's our place to reconnect, to reflect on what's happening in these crazy times, to re-examine the future of our industry, and to look very closely at Damien's bookshelf to see what's new this week and how it connects with our theme. As usual, we've had over 50 countries around the world connecting with us, over 45 institutions. Importantly, we've got all of you with us and we're thankful. We have great speakers. A couple of quick technical elements. As Jessica, one of our Wizards of Oz, said earlier, if you find that ideally you should be in gallery view, but if during the program you find that your visual collapses, please expand it again into full screen and click back to gallery view. That's the best viewing option for this program itself. So let's move forward. We're going to be talking, as is very clear from the slide you see in front of it, today's about resorts, their next destinations. I'm going to hand it over to Damien to explain a little bit more about this subject. Damien.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. We've talked a lot over the last four weeks about hotels. We've talked about restaurants, meetings and events, airlines, travel itself. And we haven't really looked at resorts. And resorts, in my opinion, are the most interesting of the lodging establishments because they involve so many different interconnected parts. And we thought with summer coming, it was time to take a closer look at this. And so we've got 2 great guests with us to try to understand the future of resorts, both short and medium term. And so you might want to make sure to stay tuned to see a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But as always, we want to begin the show with a question for you. And here it is. All right, and let's see right away how you're feeling. All right, that's interesting. Look, we've got, if you look at the bottom 3, fine, hopeful, and productive, a more positive outlook. We've got almost 75% of people with that view, maybe 70%, and only 33%, 31% confused, anxious, or alone. I'm surprised by this, but delighted. Anita, you?
I must say, I love this for a couple of reasons. A, it gives us a very honest point of view in terms of how people are feeling. So thank you to everyone who responded on this. And it's interesting that 1 in 3 are not necessarily feeling so comfortable and so positive. 2 and 3 are actually feeling hopeful. So that's really actually more than that. 50% are feeling more than hopeful. I love the 12% productive because that means we're getting into this new life and the next normal of working. But again, thank you, because this matters enormously to us because we've created this for you. So we need to make sure that we're having these conversations to help us all get through what is a very challenging time. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it's obviously we're feeling more than one thing. So we may be hopeful, but still confused. And so we know that we asked you just to choose one thing, but it gives us an indication of where our audience is at. We want to remind you to be sending in your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen already. Those can be for Anita and myself, or for the guests who are the specialists in resorts that will be with us in a little while. So please do send us those questions already. Anita?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Damien. And it's interesting because linking right to our poll, whether we're feeling hopeful, productive, confused, anxious, so much is because of the fact that our world is changing dramatically around us on a daily basis. So as per usual, we're going to take you through a little bit of a where in the world are we, and particularly what's happened in the last week. So if we look at the last week itself, and going through this really quickly, because all of these slides are available on the website, riseweekly.com. Yes, correct, rise_weekly.com. But what's happened in the last week? Very importantly, countries have started to relax their restrictions and are experimenting with managing and monitoring of COVID-19. What makes me nervous about this is the word experiments. Reason being, we need to understand what exactly is happening with this virus to see what the impacts are. Still, social distancing is increasingly being referred to as physical distancing. Why is that? because it's not about stopping being social. In addition to the physical health challenges that we have at this time and the financial health, there's also the mental health challenges. People are feeling a real pressure right now. So social distancing has changed to physical distancing to make it clear it's not about Demian and I staying apart from each other. We can still be socializing, just not within 2 meters, or quite honestly, within probably 2,000 kilometers. Contact tracing has become very important, but that links then to privacy concerns around, wait a minute, do I know too much information about Demian if I'm getting a contact tracing of everywhere he's been? And some non-contact sports are starting to restart. But sadly, the athletes and the performers are doing it without any fans in the stadiums or actually in the performances. Why is this so important? And this is something that I now shift to the more serious tone of my voice. This is what's really critical. No matter what's happening in terms of restrictions, protocols, etc., we need to know what we still don't know. We still don't understand the life cycle of COVID-19. We still don't know if there's going to be a second wave, and we're seeing warnings of that in Asia. We still don't have a cure, we don't have a vaccine, and as a result, we don't have mass availability. The timing of opening up is still a huge question. And what's coming up more and more so in conversations, COVID-19, which is coronavirus disease of 2019, could become COVID-20, could become COVID 2021. This is an evolving situation, and we need to respond in an evolving way, which takes us into our industry. And that's why this week has been such an important one, Demian, because as you and I were talking, this is the first time there have been formal standards being put out about protocols. And that's our next slide. And looking at what's happening in the world in terms of health and hygiene standards. We know that with restrictions opening up, we still need guidelines on how do people engage if they're in a hotel, if they're going to a restaurant, if they're going to a cafe, if you and I are stepping aside and having a glass of champagne at the end of Rise. The European Commission has put guidelines around phased and coordinated approach within the Schengen zone, looking at it in terms of how borders are opening up, knowing it's not at the same time. US Travel's put them in place based on the CDC, and the World Travel and Tourism Council have put in place safe travels according to the WHO. If anyone wants to have any direction to where you can find these, please drop us an email. We're riseweekly2020@gmail.com. Really important because people need to know in this next normal, how close can we get to those we love without risking anyone's health in the process? What else is going on in the industry, Demian?
I've got 2 pieces of data for everybody today. The first one comes from Open Table and their tracking of restaurant visits and reservations. And we picked 3 countries here. You've got Germany in green, the United Kingdom in gold, and the United States in blue. And you can see that over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a pretty important uptick in reservations. We're still at, the Germany, that great green line, still 80% less than the same week a year ago. So things aren't great, but they are improving. I think it's demonstrating that as restrictions ease up, people are eager to start going out again. Not everybody at first, nor should they necessarily be going out right away. But we are seeing an improvement, and that's all we want to be seeing at this point. We just want to continue to see those lines improving, more people going out to restaurants, more people traveling, more people staying in hotels, always under the assumption that infections and casualties are not increasing. So as long as we can do this in a safe way, we should continue to see these lines improve. By the way, this is one of my efforts to, as I said last week, provide a little bit more optimistic and positive news. Similarly here with the hotel industry in Europe and the US, you can see that in Europe, 76% of hotels were closed as of the 30th of April. This is according to STR. While in the US, it was only 17%. So the US has kept many of these hotels open rather than closing them, and that's for a number of reasons. Doesn't mean they're doing very well. Occupancy at the end of the month was at 30%, the end of last week was 30%, but that's a 43% improvement from when we began this show until the week ending 9th of May. We've seen a 43% improvement in occupancy in US hotels. Still a low overall number, but again, just like that restaurant number, we're starting to see the hints of a recovery. And as long as the health situation doesn't get worse, we hope that we will continue to see these numbers improve. I think it'll also be interesting to see now, as protocols are established in Europe for these travel bubbles, the number of hotels starting to open again in Europe, and that's going to be an important number for us.
Brilliant.
So that's what I got for you in terms of data. If we move forward, we've got this new thing Anita wants to talk about.
Excellent. This is where I start my challenges to Damien. Now, as we've said, what's critical about this program and this initiative is you, and it's making sure that you have the chance to ask the questions that you want. So we have a 30-second challenge. We're taking questions that we received last week that might be more relevant to this week's theme, or we just didn't get a chance to answer, even in the backstage talking about it with many that stayed on. And I have a question for Damien. Damien has a question for me, but each of us have only 30 seconds to answer it. So Damien, I'm going to take a deep breath. Throw me the question, please.
All right. I've got for you, the airline and cruise industry is a major polluter. What can we do to get them to the table regarding corporate social responsibility?
It's a great question, and it comes up often. Often we're having to explain and defend effectively what's happening with the cruise and aviation industry. Importantly, we need to separate them. How the cruise operations operate is one thing, and aviation. Have cruise ships been challenged in terms of their environmental policies and some of their behaviors? Absolutely, and they know they need to figure that out. On the aviation side, the challenge for aviation is not aviation. It's not about the airlines, it's about the emissions. And billions are being spent on emissions management to make sure that we're cutting emissions without cutting out the global pipeline for travel, trade, and tourism, which we're seeing now is going to impact negatively on the economy, and there are 68 million people reliant on that. So we're hoping desperately that as we re-engineer the future, we'll re-engineer much more CSR for both of those categories, but they need to be separated. And I know, Demi, you're looking at your clock. How many seconds?
More than 30.
Oh, shame. Okay, I have a question for you. Charlene wants to know, do you think customers will be more likely to book rooms in branded rather than independent hotels because of health and safety standards? What do you think? Go.
I think this is absolutely what the chains are hoping for. They're betting a lot right now on the fact that customers want this increased trust in cleanliness and health, and that's why they're all issuing these standards. So I think unless the independent hotels find some independent certifying body about cleanliness, like in the US, you can get the American Hotel Lodging Association Safe Stay program, I think they're at a big disadvantage. And I think this is also why in the Deloitte sentiment survey of this week, 60% of the respondents think that chain hotels are going to recover much quicker than independents. Only 9% believe that.
39 seconds. Good answer. Good answer. The important thing is the quality of the answer. The fact that you're a little bit slow, you're older than I am, so I'll give you that.
I'm going to compare times later. Let's move forward a little bit, if that's okay. And we've got, we've looked at some data now. We'd like to also look at the more qualitative issues that are going on, the headlines in the news that are sparking our interest. And I've got two headlines for you today. And as always, I haven't shared these with Anita. So my first headline comes from The Guardian. Coastal towns tell visitors to stay away as lockdown eases in England. You've got these resort towns. They live primarily on tourism. Summer season is coming. The UK has eased up on some restrictions, saying people can travel regardless of distance in many areas. And these places are saying, please don't come. We're not ready for you. There's too much risk still. And so I totally understand that. And we're always balancing the economic and the health concerns in different regions. But one of my questions is, longer term, if you were turned away, if you were told not to come, if you have a second home in these areas, and this, Blackpool is not the only place. This has been happening in the US as well. How will these regular visitors feel about the destination going forward if they've been pushed away and said, we don't want you here, even if the reason is a valid one? So it's this concern that I've got longer term about the relationship between the traveler and the destinations.
Great one.
I've got a second one for you, a little bit more serious. So you mentioned the contact tracing, and I brought up this headline about some apps that have been designed by some scientists and engineers here in Switzerland, where originally the government was asking restaurants or telling restaurants they had to take all the information about everybody that came to the restaurant, not just the name on the reservation, but everybody in the party. That has changed now to an idea of we're asking you to please do this, but there's no obligation to do it. In the States, there are many places that are saying this is going to be obligatory, also in other countries. And as you mentioned, I think it's a privacy issue, and we've got to, as individuals, as well as industry, decide where's the balance between privacy and health concerns, and where do we draw that line? And I know that I disagree with a good friend of mine where I'm on one side of this and he's on another. And I think it just goes to show that this is going to be a sensitive issue going forward. And we already know that it's easy to track people through their phones, et cetera. But as soon as they start tracking our temperature or our overall health, is that too much for people? And what is going to be the responsibility of the restaurants and hotels and other establishments that are asked to do this? And the last point really I want to make with this is, it was about restaurants. It wasn't about shopping malls or fitness centers that were being asked or told to do this. And again, it's this preoccupation I have with the fact that our industry is being highlighted for a lot of these safety issues. And I'm concerned that it sends the message to people that these are dangerous places. Be careful if you go to a restaurant. Be careful if you go to a hotel. And I think that's a longer term issue that we're going to have to deal with. I cheated a little bit as well today. I have a third one I haven't told you about. I'm going to show you something, Anita. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I need you to answer from the top of your head. Are you ready?
Yes.
The last hotel you visited?
Miami, board meetings. It was the Intercontinental.
Okay. What was the favorite travel memory that you have?
Oh, heavens. I have my ritual of whenever I travel, I sit in the lounge and I have a glass of water and a glass of champagne. So it's actually the ritual that's my favorite memory.
Okay. And where do you want to go next?
Visit my father. We've had to delay his 85th birthday in Canada because of what's happening right now. So I want to go celebrate his 85th birthday through his 85th year, even if we miss the date.
Okay. Those are the 3 questions the American Hotel and Lodging Association is asking on this Take Me Back campaign, right? Let's get people reflecting fondly on their travels and on their destinations. And you can do this online and answer those questions yourselves. Anita doesn't have to because she's done it for all of us. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Damien. That's great. And I must say, I love the 3. We gave you extra time, gave you extra choices. Great choices once again. Lovely. So now take a look at my 2. So this I thought was really interesting. Many of you have heard this past week that Qatar Airways has offered 100,000 free tickets to healthcare workers. Absolutely beautiful, because it's a way of recognizing not only do people need to get back in the air, but those who have given their lives literally to protect us need to be celebrated. I just thought this was very classy, beautifully done, and it really is a matter of, for all of us who are simply told to stay home, stay safe, keep your hands clean, it's our chance to give back to the people who've really given since the beginning of this process. The next one is my favorite one, because last week, Shanghai Disney opened up to visitors for the first time. It was all swabbed down with all the sterilizers and the bleaches. They had their protocols in place, but the reason why I showed this is this. It goes back to Damien's least favorite word that I use as frequently as possible, huggability. And for all the protocols that are being put in place and all the rules and regulations and all the contact tracing, I will say that correctly by the end of this program. My question is this: how are we damaging or risking the quality of the experience? We're a high touch, high emotive industry. Hospitality, travel, and tourism is about the human connection. Damien, you've got a great smile. If I see you in Disneyland, though admittedly you're probably going to be putting out mouse traps knowing you, if I see you in Disneyland, I can't see the smile you just gave me now because you have a mask on. So for such an emotional industry, I love the fact that we're opening up again, but in opening up, are we putting in place protocols that are necessary, but that are closing down part of who we are? Just a concern. I thought this was important, but for the huggability factor of our industry, I think it's going to struggle in the first part because it's just going to be so difficult to travel from a protocol perspective and from an ease of moving perspective, which takes me to my next. So I put a video on every week, and I wanted to share this. It's from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and it's a really interesting example of a video that was created by the country, for the country, and for the world. I just thought this was beautifully done to help make sense of what might not make sense right now, but it makes it all meaningful and it repositions the country beautifully. Please.
They called it a pandemic, the end of the world. But it was too distant. Then the curfew was like a warning of a storm on a clear summer day, but I complied and observed.
Yeah, lockdown on the quarantine has helped Jordan sort of flatten the curve quite quickly.
I saw how the guardians of our border became guardians of our existence, how people grew closer, even from a distance, how decades of nurturing innovation were bearing fruit. The storm did hit, and I saw how some moments define people, how some people define moments with compassion, patience, dedication. This is the beginning of a new world, a world we heal together, all humanity acting as one.
I must say, I love, love, love that line that there are some moments that define people and some people that define moments. And I do think that that's the spirit of these 100 or however many days it is, to see how do we actually all make it through and make it through stronger. So I thought, knowing that my ambition and the mission of our entire Wizard of Oz team is to make you cry at some point during this entire program and the series itself, I thought I'd add that in because I thought that was a really classy piece of communication.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it links a bit back to the first poll with people being hopeful. I think there is a lot of positive energy out there, even with all the concerns. Maybe
No
not
tears?
for me necessarily, but
No tears?
No tears. No tears. Let's get back to our audience. We have a second question we'd like you to answer just before we bring on our guests. And of course, this question is about the subject of today, the resort industry. So we appreciate you answering this following question, please. All right, let's see what you thought. All right, we've got 33% believe it's customer reluctance to travel, with another 20% saying it's inability to travel. So more than 50% are linking it to travel. And then this 22% saying delivering the resort experience, which is this concern we've expressed over a couple episodes, including just now with Anita, about the ability to have this experience given all the protocols that are there. Only 8% think it's linked to the ability of the resort to actually implement the safety guidelines. And I'm going to be curious to ask our guests about that. And then 17% about the customer reluctance to follow the protocols. So before we bring them on, first impressions, Anita?
I think that's really, really interesting. And that just the either the desire or the inability is over half the people. It doesn't say anything about the resort. It's actually just about the ability to travel psychologically or physically. Very interesting.
Thank you, everybody, for that. So let's bring on our two guests for today. We have Gebhard, the Chief Executive Officer of Sandals Resorts, and Dileep Mudadeniya, Vice President, John Keels Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts with us. Hello, Gebhard, and hello, Dileep.
Hello, Damien. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Dileep.
Hello, Ayubowan, everyone. Glad to be with you.
Let's start right with those results. Gebhard, is that your primary concern, the travel issue? And do you think our audience nailed it, or do you have a more pressing concern for the resort industry?
No, I think the audience nailed it. I think that's the most pressing concern that we have, in addition to the fact that there is a lot of collaboration necessary amongst all the constituents involved in a customer's journey, literally a customer's journey, from the time they leave their home, the time they get to a resort and get back home again. There are many constituencies involved that need to collaborate and cooperate in order to make it happen. So it's not one unit that can do it on their own. And that impacts exactly what your poll showed. It's the reflection of, can we travel both from a tangible and intangible perspective?
And let me ask just a quick follow-up. There was a split there between inability to travel or reluctance to travel. Do you think one is more outweighing the other, in your opinion?
I think reluctance to travel outweighs inability to travel. I think we will see the inability to travel disappear with the opening up and the easing of the restrictions. It's more the reluctance to travel, and that has a lot to do with confidence, consumer confidence. How do we overcome the insecurities at the moment? How do we provide enough confidence for people to get back on a plane and actually travel?
Thanks. And Dileep, not many people thought it was a big issue in terms of the customers following the protocols, as though, of course, the customers will follow them. Are you concerned that travelers won't follow safety protocols that you are required to enforce? Is there a tension there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this needs to be looked at it from, this is a lot to do with the geographic markets that they are arising from. Where Sri Lankans, I mean, domestic market is concerned, they're used to it, they have a certain discipline, etc. But certain markets, when they come in, we have seen in actually around the world that they may not necessarily want to follow everything. You're coming to a resort, you need to feel freedom, you need to get into a pool, you need to get into some of these things. So when you don't have all the key ingredients in a resort that you used to experience, like a buffet, Sri Lankan, for example, domestic love the huge buffet that comes in. If those things are not really there, how they want to actually react is something that we are all waiting to see. And we actually started a domestic research just to understand the nuances of the customers. But I think there could be some resistance on that, depending on the nationality where they're coming from.
Thank you. Anita?
That's a great point, Dileep. And a question to both of you, because we know why we have you on this program. The resort category being so high touch, and exactly as Dileep said, very much based on the opportunity to feel that freedom in place. We know why we have you on this program, because people want to talk about this. But my question to you both is, why did you agree to say yes? Why did you feel it was important to be on Rise and share with our viewers the correct, the informed, the current perspective on the resort category? Gebhard, please.
Sure. No, I think that's a very good question. And for me, it goes back to right at the beginning of how you started the program today. And that is, we need to make sure that we provide confidence, that we provide a positive view on how life continues. Life has to continue. We cannot keep ourselves locked down. We cannot keep ourselves isolated, and we cannot move towards a completely sterile environment and sterile life. I think COVID-19 is something that is teaching us as to what might come in the future. We will be dealing with pandemics, we'll be dealing with things that we have not dealt with in the past, that we have no experience with, and we learn as we go along. That doesn't mean that life stops. It just means that we have to adapt and we have to change. And I go back and use some comparisons here. When 9/11 happened, life stopped abruptly for most of us very quickly for quite a period of time. But we got used to a new life and a new environment fairly quickly again. Suddenly you had to go through additional loops at the airport. You knew you had to be at the airport 2 hours before departure, not anymore half an hour or 45 minutes, as I used to dash in to Geneva airport 15 minutes before departure and it was fine. Couldn't do that anymore. I think it's the same here now. We're going to get used to it. We are going to get better in applying these. It's going to become less invasive as to how these things are being applied, which is going to be important, and we'll accept it. It is really a matter of how many hoops do I have to jump through at the moment, and how much does that bother me or prevent me from getting on a plane. If I have to be at the airport 5 hours before departure, I might easily tend towards rather sitting in a car and doing a staycation than flying somewhere. If it is 3 hours before departures, I will be willing to accept that. So there's a whole string of things that we have to get used to. So for me, the important thing was to be on the program here and get that message out there and talk about the fact that life continues. There's a pent-up demand. We all want to have a good time again. We all want to go on vacation. We all need to get away and take our mind off things. And you don't want to do that in a hospital-like sterile environment. And it goes back to what Dileep said. It's going to be interesting to see how disciplined people are going to be and how much you can actually enforce things once people are on resort. You have to rely on people being and using common sense and being disciplined.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dileep, from your side?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in a crisis is what? Is giving hope. So we basically, what tourism is, what we're doing is we're selling dreams anyway, with or without crisis. So I think it's important to pass the message of hope. there is hope in life. Because human as a nature we are basically have a lot of survival tactics or survival in nature. So the survival is the instinct that we are born with, and we will adapt and move on. So adaptation, survival, those are the key messages that are basically taught over the history, over the long years of mankind. And these are actually testing times on how we evolve. And it's interesting that the man has actually gone through many crises in the past, and they will go through in various forms. There will be new innovation, there will be new technology, there will be new things that comes in. But it's very important from us as being in the industry to share a different perspective so that the people can have hope to understand that this is not the end of life. This is not the end of things. Worse things can happen in the future. You never know. This is so far the worst ever most of us have experienced. Some of them have experienced the Second World War as well. But then after that, it's one of the most horrible experience that everyone has gone through. But there's no guarantee that this is the worst experience that we will ever face in the future. You never know. I hope so. It won't become something dangerous than this, but you never know. The question is whether the world is becoming a better place or whether it's becoming worse off. Either way, there has to be hope. Now we need to share whatever we know. We need to basically fight with that instinct of survival so that we all can actually go through this life better than what it was.
It's interesting you say that, Dileep, before Demian jumps in, because of all places in the world that has developed hope and pride as part of their DNA, it's Sri Lanka. And it's quite remarkable if you think of your history and then your past history, your most recent history a year ago, and now. It's one of those times when you find out who your friends are when there's a crisis. And that's quite powerful that you as a country step up. Demian, I'm sure you have an interesting question from the hospitality side.
Yeah, changing track a little bit. I want to get back to this idea of how will the experience be at the resort? And so, we understand buffets may not be there, the travel experience, leaving those two aside. Not many of our respondents before thought that the ability to implement the protocol would be much of a challenge for you. I have a feeling that it's more difficult than the audience thinks. So could you talk to us a little bit about specific things that you need to change or that resorts in general need to change in order to follow protocols and the impact that you think that would have on the experience positively or negatively? Maybe Gebhard, you could start with that.
Sure. So implementing the protocol itself is not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is aligning your protocols with the other protocols that have to be in place along that customer journey. Because you can implement whatever you want to implement. If it doesn't tie in with what the airlines do and what the airports do and what transportation does, then you might be very far off track and not being able to actually accommodate the customers the way you want to accommodate them, or you have to accommodate them. The second part to that is, so there's a consumer customer side to it, and the other part is the employee side, the staff side. And that's where the difficulty of the implementation is more so than on the customer side. The reason why I'm saying that is because you have everyday employees come to your resort for work and they go back to where they live, and that's an environment you cannot control. But you have to provide a certain amount of security or safety when you allow them back onto the resort. So you need to do some temperature taking, some testing, some aspects of a protocol that allow you to have some assurances that the people that come to work are not necessarily infected or can bring something into the environment and potentially threaten your customers. That's the much more difficult side of things. So you have this dual aspect of the implementation of a protocol, one that needs to be aligned with a lot of other constituency, and the other one that has a control aspect to it. Where we operate, and I guess it's similar to Dileep's environment in Sri Lanka. We operate in an environment where you are dealing with developing nations, where you're dealing with people who go back into environments that are very humble, very simple, where social distancing or physical distancing, I actually don't like social distancing, I've been saying this from the beginning, but where physical distancing is just out of cultural norms, not the norm or not possible, because people live in a confined small space with many other people together. You can't control that. So that's the difficulty in terms of implementing protocols.
An interesting point of view.
Yeah.
Dileep, a quick response from your side, because our WhatsApp is on fire right now because we have a whole bunch of questions from our viewers as well. But from your side, and you're gone. you're back. From your point of view, in terms of the challenges of implementing the protocols, and I love what Gebhard you're saying about it's not just for the guests, it's for the staff as well. Quick response on that before we go to questions.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing here is that, when they come to a hotel, unlike an airplane or an airport, they're going to stay actually more than 24 hours. So they're going to stay a little longer. So as a result, the safety and sanitation and the other protocols to be implemented and sustained have a bit of a challenge. Again, I would say that, this challenge will be different from market to market. So one thing I will give you an immediate example. The buffet is something very, very important for a lot of Sri Lankan. That's one of the key reasons that they actually come for the hotel. When that has been taken out and when they've been limited in terms of what they can actually experience, they would have a second thought into that. And again, this experience needs to be divided into a resort, big hotel versus small hotels. I think there will be more propensity of people going to more boutique hotels, like few rooms, etc., because they can feel better and more safe. And in the hotels where we have 200 and 300 or 100 rooms, you might not be able to operate your 100% occupancy that you used to do. Sometimes you operate 101%, but that might not be possible, maybe like 40, 50%. As actually very correctly pointed out as well, in terms of the employee safety is a very important area. Then your room service and your hygiene will completely change the protocol. Usage of pool, you can't have actually everyone get into the pool. You have to give certain hours. This particular room numbers will give you from 9 to 11 or 9 to 12. This time the room numbers will go from 12 to 5, which people might not like it, but that's the way it should be. Yeah, and in the evening in the bars area, you need to have much reduce the number of people. The meal times have to be also more controlled, 12 to 1, one set of people, 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and so on like that. So everything needs to be like a more time and a clockwise. My concern here is that to how long whether people will tolerate something like that in hotels, whether they really want to do that, or they would actually go back very quickly to old habits and said, okay, no, we like the freedom, then whatever it happens, only 1% of fatality and we want to go through that. So this is too early to say that, but it's very, very difficult for people to come out with their old habits in resorts.
Indeed.
And then adjust it into the new norm.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's a great point. Damien, why don't you open up the questions from the viewers?
All right. As always, we've probably got a bunch of questions. Sarah, could you throw a question out to us?
Yes. Deborah asks, different resort scales and different resort types are going to recover at different paces, and most probably luxury hotels have an advantage with a lower number of keys and greater ability for its guests to travel. How do you see the recovery for lower scales?
So let me just sort of rephrase a little bit. In general, we're seeing economy and mid-scale hotels in the overall outperforming higher end hotels. The Deborah, I think was her name, thinks it'll be the opposite for resorts. Do you agree with that? And how do you see that playing out per the question? Gebhard?
I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think there's two factors that are very important to take into consideration here. From a human behavior and a human mind perspective, there is a certain amount of people, there is a demographic that is driven by price and by the offering. And you can see some of that coming through very clearly in the cruise line industry right now, which is throwing out a lot of incentives, a lot of discounts, and they are actually attracting a lot of bookings. Whereas we all thought the cruise line is going to have great difficulties for a long period of time. They're actually generating a huge amount of bookings right now, and there's a high demand, driven very much by price. I think it's similar in our industry because you have the segmentation where you're going to budget, mid-scale, upscale, and upper upscale. I think mid-scale and budget is going to recover fairly quickly because from a price point of view, the offering will be very compelling to a demographic that's going to go for that. Question again, from a human behavior point of view, and Dileep pointed it out, is how disciplined are customers going to be and how quickly are they going to fall back into old habits? I think from a profitability point of view, yes, the upper upscale and the luxury segment are going to recover faster than the rest. But from a occupancy and a volume point of view, I think the mid-scale and the budget is going to recover fast.
Nice. Let's get another question, Sarah.
Sure. Felipe asks, do you think that resorts will benefit from the problems that cruises are experiencing?
Well, if we take what Gebhard said, I mean, Dileep, do you think so?
It's quite surprising to see how the cruises are actually getting those bookings and then confirmations. As far as we are concerned, we already seen some pre-bookings coming in as at now, for starting from August and beyond. Those are not huge numbers, but the bookings are coming from various parts of the world. So it's an early recovery. And looking at from the past, I think also an inspiration, if the cruise industry is having such demand, and I believe the destinations also will have, because they are willing to travel, and especially there might be a less travel in inter-regional travel, but the intra-regional travel can be actually something which you have to look at it. So it's a good time that, especially countries like Sri Lanka and the subcontinent, to see whether anything can be done within the region, and those travel bubble concept that can be actually promoted in between certain countries.
And do you think, not to go on the cruise issue too much, but if a second wave comes later in the year and again hits the cruise industry, I don't know how they would recover from that image, right? So are resorts using the safety issue, that it's safer to resort than on a cruise at all, to distinguish them, or is that not part of the playbook, Gebhard?
I think people never compared resorts is a substitute or vice versa for the cruise. It's two different market segments altogether. So somebody who wants to go to resort will anyway go and instead of a cruise. So it's people are coming for different. And what happens if again a breakout takes place in a cruise? People have short memories, that I actually have firmly believe, and they would actually wait for it and then go back to when things are better. So if something happens in resorts, obviously we'll have to close down and we'll have to come back with new solutions. And so in the long term it will go, but the short term, the medium term, some of these properties will have real challenging time.
And another question, sir.
Oh, Gebhard had actually a response to that.
Oh, great.
Just a quick one. The one thing I would disagree with, I think the cruise industry and the resort industry are competing head to head. We can see this specifically in this part of the world. It is very competitive. Will the resort industry directly point out if there is a second wave in terms of the difference and maybe the perceived higher safety? I don't think that they will do that, but the play is on the freedom of space, the freedom of movement, the freedom of you're not confined in a limited space. And that's the big difference between a cruise and a resort. There's some other differences there as well, but they are competing. And I think when it does come to it, if there is a second wave, which we all hope there is not, but if there is a second wave, it's going to be interesting how the consumer is going to react. I think the cruise industry will have a huge problem if there is a second wave.
Indeed. And
I would agree with that. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I was referring to the subcontinent of India where the cruise is actually not developed. So therefore people don't actually look at it as something alternative.
Right.
Sarah, we got another one?
Yes, we do. One that just came in from Shrey asking, do you believe that resorts can promote a sense of unique individualism versus an isolated form of it in the post-pandemic world?
Who would like to take that?
I believe very much so that we can, yes, because resorts, specifically in the upper upscale and the luxury segment, are moving much more towards an experiential aspect of a vacation. So it's all geared towards personal experience. It's geared towards unique experiences. I think we have a huge opportunity now, in conjunction with a number of other constituencies, to specifically focus on environmental aspects. You mentioned CSR at the beginning. I think that's very important. It plays really into this as well. We can see this ourselves. There's a lot of consumers who want to be actively involved in CSR activities, be that going into communities, helping underprivileged communities, helping to revive reefs, environmental aspects. We have a huge opportunity now from an environmental point of view to make these unique experiences.
Right. Excellent. I'm getting the signal from our Wizards of Oz behind the velvet curtain. So Damien, if I may, I'm going to ask the last question. I'm going to give you lovely gentlemen both 20 seconds each. If you had a niece, a nephew, a child at a hospitality institution around the world right now, and they're looking to their future, what advice in 20 seconds would you give them in terms of readying for when our doors, borders, and skies open again? Dileep, 20 seconds, go.
Currently, 1.2 billion people are traveling. It's going to be 1.6 billion, and go and embrace the future potential by being in the industry.
Brilliant. Gebhard.
Travel will never stop. I think there's going to be an even bigger need and a pent-up demand for people to get out there and change the way they experience things in the world. The world has opened up, so be ready for it. There's a huge opportunity in this industry. It's the best industry in the world.
You both mentioned something really important. It's a human need. It's not just a leisure activity anymore. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I must say, Damien, I think these lovely gentlemen could teach us a lot about the competition with the clock.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand over to you, Damien, to do the honors of saying a very loving thank you to our guests.
Okay, I'm not sure if it's a loving thank you, but it is a sincere thank you. You know, Dileep, we hadn't met before. I know you're very close with Anita, and she immediately, when we came up with this topic, said, I know who I want on this show. And, you know, I trust her, and obviously you've done a great job, so thank you very much. And Gebhard, usually I know my guests, the people that I invite, quite well. We had not met before. A close contact put us in touch, and you were, you know, profile perfect person for the show, and I really appreciate you making all the time and these great answers from that resort perspective from the Caribbean. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
Okay.
Take care, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, Gebhard.
Wow.
You know, I have to say, I liked the fact that they didn't agree on everything. And I mean, I personally think resorts and cruises compete much more than Dileep thought, but then he brought in that regional aspect. So you see that it's not, you know, even the same industry is not the same all around the world.
And it's true, it's as you say, and they were talking about whether it was about the resort, the buffets, the cruise versus resorts. It's market by market and it's culture by culture. And that needs to be taken into account. Really interesting. That was great. Great choices again.
And I thought the segment analysis is also important, right? With the price cutting coming from cruises and the pressure and whether, you know, resorts will recover differently than city hotels. I think that'll be interesting to see going forward.
Brilliant. Excellent. That was quite fun.
Thank you. So moving forward.
This is one of my favorite sections of the program because I get to hear how the Grouch exposes his concerns about the industry itself. And then I put on my rose-colored glasses and see if I can convince him to be confident. So Damien, go.
All right, I got two concerns. First one is I'm concerned about my summer holiday. We had big travel plans. I just don't know if I want to undertake a big trip. I have not been convinced by this yet. Do I want to get on a plane? I don't think so. Do I want to drive? Yes. Do I want to leave international? There's difference of opinions in my family and some friends we're going to travel with. And I just assume that if I, who am in the industry and have been there for many years, am somewhat reluctant, like we saw with the poll earlier, I think people who don't have as much faith or understand the industry are probably even more reluctant, and I'm concerned about that.
It's a great concern. And I must say, the reason why I'm confident is that you of all people know the impact and the value of your travel. So to your point, are you going to travel where you initially thought? Probably not. But I know you do know the value of travel, not just for the beneficiaries in terms of the value chain in the industry, but for you as a family and connecting. And that ultimately you do want that huggability time, whether it's closer by or it's somewhere else. So my confidence is like, as Gebhard said, we're human beings. We need to travel. We'll find out how and where, depending on how everything opens up again.
Yeah. All right. I got a second quick concern. People didn't seem to think the ability to implement the protocols was going to be that much of a challenge, or getting employees, training them, or having customers follow them. I have less faith in people than you do, clearly. I think nobody in the world has as much faith as you do. And so my concern is for the people out there, right, going on holiday or not going on holiday, going back to the stores, respecting the protocols. There's this quarantine fatigue going on. People feel this need to be socializing again. And so my concern is for everybody, for our audience and everybody out there, are they able to find their place in this changing world, not just on the street in their physical place, but what's their role going to be to help, as Gebhard said, you know, the industry is going to need to change, and by being in the industry, you can help it change. And I guess my concern is, are the people out there they say they're hopeful, but are they truly ready and willing to help initiate these changes and find their place?
I hate to disagree with you in my confidence, but I'm going to agree with you on the concern, because I think we live in a very I-centric generation. And this is the first time people's right to travel has been challenged by the responsibility when traveling. So I do think there's going to be frustration. I do think there's going to be some pushback. And I hope to God that you are not right, if I can say that.
Okay. Look, I know you're always more confident. And so I always think that I'm right. And I always hope that you're right. I'm not sure this time exactly where the difference lies, but I think we both are seeing things a little bit more similarly this week than in previous weeks, which may not be a bad thing.
Indeed. And I really hope one day I can say on this open forum, I told you so, but we'll wait and see. So on that, we're introducing a couple of interesting new little elements to the program itself, because again, we want to really hear back from all of you. And importantly, what we're going to ask you to do now is actually linked to the theme of our next program. We are asking you, please, to share with us your concerns. I have my concerns of these times. Damien does as well. Everyone in the world is being affected now, not just because of travel, tourism, and hospitality, because this is affecting our lives, our homes, our livelihoods, and the lives of people that we love. So we want to ask you all, please, not now, after the program's finished, to jump onto Twitter and to post on rise_weekly, that's our Twitter handle, your answer to the following question. Right now, right now, what are you most concerned about? Be as concrete as you can, but if we were to say spontaneously, what are you most concerned about? Please share with us on rise_weekly on Twitter, because that's going to be really important for us to get a read of not just what we're concerned about as people, forget being practitioners and professionals, but just understand where is everyone's minds and hearts right now. That's going to be really important. Damien, I'm going to hand it over to you now for some last questions.
Yeah, I think we can take maybe 2 more questions, Sarah, maybe even 3. Do you have some for us?
I do. Anthony asks, with the rise of unemployment, do you think that travelers will likely think twice about spending their limited disposable income on vacations when their careers are uncertain? So do you think we'll see an adjustment in pricing to entice travelers?
Yeah, I mean, we had this discussion, I think, in our first episode as well, right? How do you justify spending money on a leisure activity and travel when you may be out of work or concerned about your job? So I think that goes back to the point about Gebhard, about cruises needing to cut prices. Resorts may follow suit. The economy and budget hotels outperforming higher end hotels. I think people are cautious about traveling and about spending money.
And it's great because I think sadly this is probably going to be our only question we can answer now because of time, but I think it's an important question to end our questioning, pre-post show questioning, because also no matter where we go, whether it's to a cruise ship, to an island, we need airlines. And because of the protocols and the pressure on airlines, we know the cost of aviation is going to go up. So that is going to have a distinct negative impact on traveling, over and above the fact that people are just concerned. So I'm very sorry to cut you off on only one question, Damien. Reason being, as you know, we have a second really interesting element that we wanted to share. It came up in our first program and we said it from the beginning. How are we using this time? How are we using this 100 days or however many it is to basically shape what is our COVID-19 story? What have we been doing to make the most of this time as people looking to the industry in the future? So there's a great idea that's been created by one of our team, lovely Katya, who's an intern with me at my company, who's a former EHL grad. And she came up with the idea of your COVID-19 story. The idea being that we want to hear your stories. We've created an Instagram account and we're going to be looking at them to see how do we actually share, what are people doing? How are they responding during this time? What we need you to do is send us an email. We'll send you the instructions. We'll give you the details in a second, and you can tell us our story. So we're going to let Katya explain it from her side as an example.
Hello, I'm Katya Pereira. I am South African, and I just recently graduated from EHL in January. So my COVID-19 story is that because I'm a fresh graduate, I've been looking for jobs, doing the applications and interviews, and obviously now with the situation, everything has been put on hold. During this time, I was building a relationship with Anita, and I was very lucky because I put forth the question in, could I have an internship during this period? And she happily obliged me. So now I've been supporting the team with the social media marketing, and so far it's such a great experience. I've really learned so much. So the way that I'm positive during this time is just to keep busy, to have a daily routine that makes sure I'm doing something, and just to outreach and talk to people and make sure everyone in my life is happy, and to gain as much information about the situation as possible. So I just want to say thank you to Raz for being there for everyone.
Stunning. So that's a little example. We'll put 1 to 2 of these on every single week so that you can share your story, not just with the RISE team, but with all the viewers itself. What do you think, Demi?
Like I told you before, I don't really know how to work Instagram, but I do think that from what my kids tell me, that's where we want to be, and that's where we want to see what people have to say. And I think the idea of people being able to share this and trying to build this community that we've got going here, I think it's a great move for the show, and I think it's a great way for people to reach out and connect with each other. So I look forward to seeing those and finally figuring out how to use Instagram.
Brilliant. Such fun. Over to you, Damien.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much all the time we've got. I know we've got more questions that Anita and I will answer after the show, as always, so make sure you stay on. We'll be right back with you. Next week, we've got a slightly different angle for the show. We're calling it Checking In. And if you saw that first question today, we were checking in with you. How are you doing? And, you know, great that so many of you are hopeful, and we know that there are other feelings people have as well, and we don't just have one feeling. And next week, we want to address a little bit more our role as people in this industry going forward, specifically your roles, how you're doing, and the well-being of everybody out there in the industry and that watches the show. So I think it's a little something different, still very hospitality and travel focused, but really more focused on you than ever before. So we look forward to having you with us next week. And there's a QR code up there. Feel free to take that right now and already register for that episode if you'd like.
Right. I'm looking forward to next week, I must say, because it really is about how are we using this time? What courses are we taking? What learning are we doing? Are we spending our time every Monday together? Because ultimately, this is a completely surreal time. We need to keep checking in because we're human, and that's going to make us stronger for when we can actually move on to where we are. So we're going to wrap this up because we're conscious of people on time in terms of being on the hour. Please, please, if you've missed any of our episodes, or if you're wanting someone to actually see it as well and share it, we have our RISE website. It's rise-weekly.com. All the past episodes are there, so you can check out how Demian's hair has been growing since the very beginning of this process itself. And please do share what you think. If you know anyone who's struggling to connect, they might be having some logging in difficulties, please drop us an email at the email address you see, riseweekly2020@gmail.com. As always, a very special thanks to our Wizards of Oz, Jessica, Grace, Sarah, and Katia behind the yellow velvet curtain. From my side, just want to say stay safe, stay home, stay hopeful, keep your hands clean, and we will see you next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. If you want to hang on for some extra Q&A, please do so. But to everyone, thank you and enjoy the week ahead.
What she said.
Hello again.
Hello. I like this part of the show because it's a little bit more relaxing, and I really do like having the conversation, answering the questions. So unless you've got something up front, Anita, I say we just jump to the questions.
I must say, I always enjoy this part of the show as well, because before I'm asked to turn on my camera, I always want to make you sweat a little bit and hang back just to see if you can carry on your own. Brilliant. Excellent. Question time.
All right.
Great. Marco asks, how can luxury properties deliver the same level of 5-star service in this new era? Do you believe they should adapt, so invest in technology, or simply wait for demand levels to reach pre-COVID levels to deliver the usual standards of service?
That's a loaded question. Let me jump in with a couple of things. First, if you look at the sentiment surveys, most people now are thinking we're not going to see pre-COVID demand for hotels for at least 2 years, let's say. So we can't wait. Second, I don't think anybody who thinks strategically in the industry is saying we're just going to not do anything. Everybody's understanding that they've got to innovate and change. We talked a little bit about that last week as well. What they need to change, what they need to adapt. I think every company has a different, culture and a different approach towards service. So they're all going to find their own ways, the ways to do it. I do think they will continue to offer a luxury experience compared to other sectors of the industry, not just because of the physical building, but the service aspect. But it will be different. And I'm not here to explain exactly how it will be different. It's, each company will decide for themselves, but that's going to be their challenge, right? And as Anita pointed out with the Disney, how do we continue to give this experience given these new protocols, given these new regulations? And I think this may actually shed some light on the different abilities of different firms to do this, right? Some firms are going to figure it out quicker and establish some norms, and then we'll have some later firms come in and say, oh, that's working for those companies, we're going to do the same thing. So I would say keep your eyes on who are the leaders on this, the ones that are establishing the new norms, as opposed to the fast followers that will latch on. You can see that a little bit with the cleanliness standards, right? Right away, you had Marriott and Accor out in front of this with their new policy certifications, and then you've had a bunch of firms coming a little bit later with it, realizing, oh, this is important. And then there's a couple companies that haven't even come out with it yet. And I think you'll see something similar with service and luxury.
Yeah, it's a great point, Damien, because I think importantly, even if someone waits to get back to 2019 levels, which could be 2021, 2022, the product expectation is going to be different because those protocols are critical. What we are going to find is that as we find a cure, as we understand the life cycle, as we get vaccines in, the protocols will shift accordingly as to what's now required once we've all been vaccinated. But you're 100% correct. To wait 18, 24 months is to shut down the business. And even if one does wait, you still have to adopt the protocols.
Agreed.
Excellent.
Great.
Sarah, you got another one for us?
Yes. Kevin asks, what do you think about intermediate platforms?
Interesting question. I'm presuming that's referring to the OTAs and the whole, the meta searches they are critical. They will always be critical. There will always be a proportion of the market. But what is very important is that they can no longer be generic. There has to be brand equity that comes into that. And ultimately then it's going to be then based on selling price only, and that diffuses equity right through. On top of that, they're going to also need to adjust to make sure that the fulfillment of protocols are being demonstrated by the properties that are being advertised. Because even if Damien's looking for the best value for money price, if he sees that the protocols aren't in place, he might reconsider completely and go for something at a higher price because they have the certification in place. Damien, your thought?
Not much more to add there. I think like any part of the value chain, you're going to have to see some changes there. And I think what some of the hotel companies have been saying is we have not seen a lot of support from these booking, the OTAs during this time. And so they're starting to reevaluate their relationship with them. And so I'm hopeful, it may not be the right word, but curious to see how the hotel companies are able to break free a little bit more from the OTAs than before. They've always been wanting to do this. They've been pushing for that. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I think now is the moment where they can start to really have to build that trust and that relationship back with the customer and not rely as much on the OTAs. So it's either going to go one way or the other. We're going to see a lot more OTAs because people are using technology more, or we're going to see less because the hotels are able to build that trust and relationship with the customers that they so desperately want.
All part of the changes.
Yeah. Sarah?
Yes. Etty asks, do you think that the size and scale of a resort, hotel, or airline impacts the follow-up on the implementation of new protocols?
So is that meaning, Anita, that the larger, bigger companies will be able to implement the protocols more easily than smaller companies? Is that how you take that question?
I'm taking it as more compliance. I interpret it as compliance. So from your side, what do you think? And then I'll give you my compliance side.
from my side, I think the large companies, they have too much liability if they don't follow through with these issues. So they are going to be absolutely adamant that every hotel, whether it's franchised or managed, leased or owned, follows the new standards, not only of the country that they're in, but of the brand. So I think they're going to be able to implement, control, and measure these protocols much more than smaller firms will.
I agree. And part of me thinks as well that from an airline perspective, it'll be a condition of operating. So to be a member of IATA, the International Air Transport Association, you need to actually ensure compliance the same way they're doing now with carbon emissions in terms of flight strength and managing all the emissions going forward towards 2030 targets. So I think that's a really important part, but it will be a cost of business that is not negotiable, from my point of view.
And do you think we're going to see surcharges? Because I had a friend booked a hotel yesterday and he showed me the bill after. He's like, look, there's this line at the bottom. It says, oh, additional cleaning fee already. So are we going to see surcharges like we've seen fuel? In recent years, we saw these safety surcharges after 9/11 and fuel surcharges at other time. Or do you think hotels are going to be and airlines can't separate that new expense?
I don't think that's ethical to charge. It's the same. It's not like Wi-Fi was, where 5-10 years ago we used to pay for Wi-Fi and now it's free. This is a basic human safety condition. That shouldn't be negotiable. I don't think that should be an additional cost. That should be an additional part of the promise of taking care of and hosting guests.
Okay, so they won't separate out the cost, but they will factor it into their price. I mean, we will be paying for it. We just won't have it.
Exactly.
And let me ask you a follow-up question, which I meant to ask the guys. 2-3 years from now, a vaccine is out, or earlier, I hope. Will we go back to previous standards in terms of cleanliness and safety? If we've established that these are cleaner ways to fly a plane or to clean a hotel room, will we then say, well, the virus is gone, we don't need to do that anymore? Or is that just a new standard that's going to be there forever?
It's a great question, and it makes me think about when we went through in Cape Town, where I used to live, with the water crisis. Because ultimately, COVID-19 has made it very clear to people why washing your hands is so important, why sanitation and sanitizers are so important, and why respecting distance. It's an extreme now, but it's reprogrammed all of us, and quite honestly, why saving is so important, so that if there is a challenge, we have a nest egg. Like with the water crisis and everyone being put on restrictions of water, even when the dams filled up again and water wasn't an issue, it created a more water responsible society. I do believe that COVID-19, even once we're all vaccinated, we will be a more hands clean, hygiene respectful society than we were before, because we didn't know that to have a pandemic potentially managed and controlled to the point of saving lives, simply because we wash our hands for 20 seconds, that's pretty incredible. So the responsibility and the future is literally in our clean hands.
Well said. Sarah, do we have another question?
Yes. Cheyenne asks, the 2008 financial crisis allowed companies like Airbnb to come up with business models that really suited the situation. What should the future hospitality startups be looking at moving forward?
Very interesting.
Look, I work with a couple startups, and so I can't share their projects, but I will tell you, they're all very different. There are so many opportunities right now, from safety and cleanliness to competition, the OTA issue, the experiential issue, the virtual. There's so many possibilities that I think it's not about what should you be looking at. It's like you can look at anything and at this time say, how will this change? How is this changing? And how will this need to change as a result of this crisis and new protocols, new regulations, government policies? And people should find one that they're interested in, that they're passionate about, and work towards that. I don't think there is a specific answer. Before we had the question about technology, clearly technology is going to play a huge role in many of the things I just mentioned, but there's other non-tech solutions as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I agree, crisis breeds innovation, and I think we're going to see that in the next couple of years.
Indeed. And this goes back to ultimately the gig economy, because at the end of the day, 80% of travel, tourism, and hospitality is small, medium, micro enterprises. So whether it's Airbnb or something else, it exposed the opportunity that people have, even just by using their own homes, to get involved in the travel and tourism economy. So it's not necessarily about the product, it's about the ability to uplift people out of poverty into the whole value chain by using smaller enterprises to do so. So I'm really hoping that with so much having collapsed because of COVID-19, innovation will focus not necessarily on the product, but the opportunity creation for small, medium, and micro enterprises to re-enter the economy, knowing that some of them will just not have survived the COVID-19 test.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is, if you think about how important the customer-employee relationship has been to create the experience in the service, and if now we're saying there's going to be less interaction between customer and employee, where is the opportunity or the way that these companies can still establish the bond between the company and the customer without the employee's social interaction with the guest? And so there is an example of an opportunity where it might be technology, it might not, to help establish that relationship and build those bonds.
I think, Damien, there's a huge opportunity here, because technically speaking, and knowing what you actually, what is important to you about hospitality, I think you should explore with some of your students creating a hug app.
Hug app.
Even if people can't hug, there's still huggability, and you are the perfect person to create that.
I think it exists already. I think you can press a button and it sends you a virtual hug. I'm going to send you that app.
Thank you.
If I can figure out how to do that. Do we have another question, Sarah?
Yes, we do. So these are two questions combined about the restaurant operations.
Okay.
So do you think restaurant operations will normalize anytime soon, or will COVID-19 be a basis for restaurant takeaways to boost instead of enjoying food at restaurants?
I mean, that's the big question, right? We know over the last 6 to 8 weeks, if we just look at U.S. data, takeaway and delivery have shot 30 to 50, 60, 70% in some areas where dining in wasn't permitted. I showed you some data at the beginning of the show where in those countries that have been relaxing restrictions, we're starting to see restaurant visits tick upward. How long will that take is a question I can't answer. I think more fundamental is if the restrictions stay in place for 6 months, a year and a half, and you can only have 30 to 50% of the guests in the restaurant, et cetera. Not only is, going back to the previous questions, is there opportunity there for people to innovate how we deliver a restaurant experience and how we make money in a physical space where we can't have as many people. I think there's huge opportunities there. But can the restaurants survive with less customers, and how will they do that? And I don't have an answer, but it is, I think, the fundamental question for the restaurant industry.
And that's a great point, because what I found really interesting about that question was the word normalize. What is normal? Because it's not even about the new normal, it's the next normal, and then the next after that. That's going to be a whole re-engineering of the experience based on not just restaurant operations, but how guests of the restaurants have changed and what they expect. Finale question, please, Sarah.
Yes. Jennifer asks, the only reason I go to resorts is for the super personal service. I like feeling spoiled, which I guess most people do when they go to resorts. If employees need to social distance from guests, how can resorts maintain the standards guests are accustomed to? And I think it would be interesting to hear this from a hotel and travel perspective as well.
I mean, I think this is what we were kind of getting at before, and I think this is the challenge, right? How are you going to feel special and spoiled if you can't be hanging out with the bartender or in a crowd, right? If you can't even be with other guests partying, or you're afraid in the pool to be too close. I think this is the big challenge, and I think those resorts that figure this out are going to have a huge advantage, because it's not a physical thing they just have to add. It's going to be a training issue. It's going to be a cultural issue. It's going to be an interaction. So I don't know how they're going to do it. I think that's why I'm not running resorts.
I love the question, and I love your answer, Damien, because that was the whole premise of what we said Rise was about. There's so much changing. It's not about knowing what the answers are. It's actually figuring out what is the question. To your point, we talk about food and beverage, reception. What about the pools? What about that water-based environment? Why do we know? And it goes back to what Dileep said around the fact that people go to resorts for freedom. If that freedom is now contained, what difference does that make? But it's a very, very real watch and see. And everyone's watching, even people in the resort industry are keeping an eye on this. But great, great, great final question. So thank you for that.
I'm going to add something on. I'm just going to say, there are, like we said before, differences in resorts. That 12-room detached villas in the Maldives is very different from a 2,000-person all-inclusive mass experience. And not better or worse, just saying their challenges are different and the range of solutions they have is very different. So, always be segmenting and looking at different kinds of business models and customer experiences to really dig a little deeper.
Debbie, I have a question for you. I've been looking on your back shelf and I've been looking for your bottle of suntan lotion in honor of resorts.
I went a different route. I've got 2 postcards. I've got a postcard from Yellowstone Valley here, where I go fly fishing, and I have a postcard from Cape Cod where I spent a great week with my son alone 2 summers ago.
I was afraid you were actually going to hang your Speedos on the back shelf.
No.
And that's what I thought, no.
You wish. Good try.
Brilliant. I will leave it to you to give the loving close.
Again, not sure it's loving close. We really do appreciate everybody being here, the questions. We prepare a lot for the show, but nothing can really prepare us for the audience's reaction. Email us if you like the show, tell your friends, pass the word along. We'd love to reach more people. And if you don't like the show, email us and let us know what we can do to improve. And have a great week, everybody.